Hello, my name is Marcus Thompson. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a cybersecurity consultant in Denver, Colorado. If you asked me to describe my life, I'd say it's like solving puzzles that nobody else wants to touch. Complicated, overlooked, but surprisingly rewarding. I'm not one to share personal stories, but what happened last Christmas changed everything. And I think you need to hear this. Not because I want sympathy, but because sometimes the person your family writes off becomes the very person holding everything together. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I grew up in a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, in one of those neighborhoods, where every house looks identical except for the mailbox colors. My family was what you'd call typically American middle class, ambitious, and obsessed with appearances. My father, Robert Thompson, worked as a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company. He was the kind of man who wore polo shirts to barbecues and talked about quarterly projections at dinner. My mother, Patricia, was a real estate agent who treated our home like a showroom and our family like her personal success story. I was the middle child of three. My older brother, Daniel, 2 years ahead of me, was everything my parents wanted, star quarterback in high school. Business degree from Arizona State, now a successful marketing executive in Scottsdale, with a perfect wife and 2 kids. Younger sister Rebecca, 3 years younger, followed the same golden path, valedictorian, pre-med, at University of Arizona, now a pediatrician in Tucson. They were the shining examples, the ones my parents bragged about at neighborhood gatherings. Then, there was me. While Daniel threw touchdown passes, I was in the computer lab learning programming languages. While Rebecca studied for AP exams, I was building websites for local businesses to earn extra money. I wasn't athletic like Daniel or academically prestigious like Rebecca. It was just ... different. I preferred staying home with my laptop to going to parties. I wore black hoodies instead of preppy clothes. I listened to electronic music instead of whatever was popular. My parents didn't understand me, and frankly, I didn't try to help them. The black sheep label started early. At family dinners, when my parents asked about our days, Daniel would talk about football practice, and Rebecca about honor roll achievements. When they turned to me, I'd mention a coding project or a freelance website I'd built, and their eyes would glaze over. "That's nice, Marcus," my mother would say dismissively. Then immediately pivot back to asking Daniel about college recruitment letters. My father was particularly vocal about his disappointment. "Marcus, you need to think about your future." He'd lecture during my senior year. "This computer stuff is just a hobby. You need a real career path." When I told them I wanted to study computer science instead of business, the dinner table went silent. "Computer science?" My mother repeated, like I'd announced I wanted to become a circus performer. "Honey, that's not very ... stable. What about following Daniel into business?" I attended Colorado State University in Fort Collins, partly for their excellent computer science program, but mostly to get away from the constant comparisons. Those 4 years were transformative. I wasn't the weird kid anymore. I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who understood that code could be beautiful, that solving complex problems was thrilling. I excelled academically, but more importantly, I found my confidence. During college, I started freelancing seriously. What began as building simple websites for friends became a legitimate business. I was working with startups, helping them secure their digital infrastructure, consulting on cybersecurity protocols. By my junior year, I was earning more than most graduates' starting salaries. But when I shared this with my family during visits home, their response was always lukewarm. "That's great, Marcus," they'd say, and immediately ask when I was going to get a real job at a big company after graduation. I made a decision that sealed my black sheep status. I turned down a job offer from IBM to start my own cybersecurity consulting firm. The company wanted me to move to New York, wear suits, climb the corporate ladder. It was everything my parents thought I should want. When I declined, the family reaction was explosive. "You're throwing away your future for..." "What?" my father shouted during that phone call. "Some fantasy about being an entrepreneur?" My mother was equally dismayed. "Marcus, This is exactly what we were afraid of. You're being impractical. Look at Daniel. He has security, benefits, a clear career path, and Rebecca's going to be a doctor. What are you going to be? A computer person? The way she said it made it sound like I'd chosen to become a professional juggler. So I stayed in Colorado and built my business. Sentinel Cybersecurity Solutions, from my small apartment in Denver. The early years were tough, 18-hour days, living on ramen and determination, slowly building a client base. I specialized in helping small to medium businesses protect themselves from cyber threats, something that became increasingly crucial as more companies went digital. Meanwhile, my siblings continued their picture-perfect trajectories. Daniel got promoted to regional director, bought a massive house in Scottsdale, started posting Facebook photos of family vacations to Hawaii and Europe. Rebecca completed her residency, joined a prestigious pediatric practice, got engaged to a fellow doctor. Every family phone call was an update on their latest achievements. Followed by awkward silence when the conversation turned to me. The family dynamics became even more strained when I started dating Alina Rodriguez, a brilliant software engineer. I met at a tech conference in 2018. Alina was everything I'd ever wanted. Incredibly smart, funny, shared my passion for technology, and didn't care that I wore jeans to fancy restaurants. But when I brought her home for Thanksgiving that year, the reception was chilly. My parents were polite but distant. They asked Alina safe surface-level questions about her job, but seemed uncomfortable with her confidence, her technical knowledge, the way she could hold her own in conversations about things they didn't understand. After dinner, I overheard my mother telling my father, "She seems nice. But don't you think Marcus could find someone more traditional? Someone who might encourage him to be more stable?" That comment stung because it revealed how my parents saw my entire life as something that needed fixing, correcting, redirecting toward their vision of success. They couldn't see that I was happy that my business was growing, that Alina and I were building something meaningful together. To them, if it didn't look like Daniel's life or Rebecca's life, it wasn't valid. Alina and I got married in a small ceremony in Rocky Mountain National Park in 2019. My parents attended but spent the entire reception comparing it to Daniel's elaborate country club wedding 3 years earlier. "It's very casual," my mother observed, clearly meaning it as criticism. "I suppose it suits Marcus's lifestyle." Even my wedding wasn't right by their standards. But while my family was dismissing my choices, my business was thriving. The demand for cybersecurity expertise exploded, especially during the pandemic, when every business suddenly needed robust digital security. Companies that had barely heard of cybersecurity were desperately seeking help as cyber attacks skyrocketed. My phone rang constantly with new clients, from local Denver businesses to national corporations. By 2021, Sentinel Cybersecurity Solutions had 15 employees and was generating 7 figures annually. I was being invited to speak at conferences, quoted in industry publications, consulted by government agencies on digital security protocols. But when I shared these milestones with my family, their responses remained dismissive. "It's nice." "Marcus" became my mother's standard reply, followed immediately by updates about Daniel's latest promotion or Rebecca's research being published in medical journals. The breaking point came during Christmas 2022. The whole family gathered at my parents' house in Phoenix, as we had every year since childhood. The house was impressive, a 4-bedroom. Spanish colonial with a pool, perfectly landscaped yard, the kind of home that screamed successful family. My parents had lived there for over 20 years, and it was the centerpiece of their identity. Daniel arrived with his family in a new Tesla. Rebecca with her fiancé in his BMW. I pulled up in my reliable but modest Honda Civic. And I could see my mother's slight grimace through the window. Alina and I had driven down from Denver. We were looking forward to a nice family holiday, despite the usual dynamics. The weekend started typically. Daniel regaled everyone with stories about his company's expansion into international markets. Rebecca shared news about her engagement plans and the research grant she'd received. When the conversation turned to me, I mentioned that my company had just signed a major contract with a Fortune 500 company to overhaul their entire Cybersecurity. Infrastructure. My father's response was predictable. That's good, Marcus. But have you thought about what happens when this technology bubble bursts? Maybe it's time to consider a more stable career path. Daniel's company is always hiring. Implication was clear my success was temporary. My career choice still fundamentally flawed. Christmas Eve dinner was when everything exploded. We were sitting around the dining room table, the same table where I'd endured countless lectures about my life choices. The conversation naturally drifted to family updates and future plans. Daniel was talking about possibly buying a vacation home in Aspen. Rebecca mentioned she and her fiancé were looking at houses in an exclusive Tucson neighborhood. Then my father, perhaps emboldened by wine, decided to address what he clearly saw as the elephant in the room. "You know, Marcus," he began, "your mother and I have been talking. We're getting older, thinking about retirement. You worry about your future, about Elena's future. This house," he gestured around the dining room, "this will eventually need to be decided upon. Daniel and Rebecca have shown they can handle responsibility, make good decisions." The implication hung in the air like smoke. My mother jumped in to soften the blow. "What your father means is that we want to make sure everyone's taken care of. But we also need to be practical about who can manage significant assets. Some people are better suited for certain responsibilities." Rebecca looked uncomfortable. Daniel stared at his plate, and Elena reached for my hand under the table. I felt that familiar sensation, the frustration of being dismissed, overlooked, considered less capable than my siblings. But this time was different. This time, I had something they didn't know about. "So let me understand this correctly," I said, my voice steady, but my heart pounding. "You're suggesting that because I chose a career path you don't understand, because I didn't follow the traditional route, I'm not responsible enough to be trusted with family assets." My parents exchanged glances, clearly realizing they'd overplayed their hand. "Marcus, that's not what we meant," my mother started, but I held up my hand. "No, let's be clear about what's happening here. For 15 years, you've treated me like family disappointment. Nothing I've accomplished has been good enough because it doesn't look like what you expected success to look like. You've dismissed my career, my business, my marriage, my choices, all because they don't fit your narrow definition of achievement." The room was completely silent. Elena squeezed my hand encouragingly. Daniel and Rebecca looked like they wanted to disappear. My parents sat frozen, probably realizing they'd pushed too far. But I wasn't done. "You want to talk about responsibility? About managing significant assets? About who's really capable of handling important decisions?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe. To our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I pulled out my phone and opened my digital files. Finding the document I'd been carrying around for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. "I have something to show you," I said, standing up from the table. "Something that might change your perspective on who exactly is responsible for what in this family." I walked to my father's home office and returned with his printer, connecting my phone and printing out a legal document. The printer whirred as several pages emerged. Gathered the papers and returned to the dining room, where my family waited in confused silence. "This," I said, placing the document on the table in front of my father, "is something you should probably read." My father picked up the papers, adjusted his reading glasses, and began scanning the first page. Watched his face change as the words registered. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, and the color drained from his cheeks. "What, ... what is this?" he whispered. "That," I said calmly, "is the deed to this house. This house that you've lived in for 23 years. This house that you just implied I wasn't responsible enough to inherit. This house that I have owned. For the past 6 months." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room. My mother snatched the papers from my father's hands, reading frantically. "This can't be right," she said, her voice shaking. "This is our house. We have a mortgage. We make payments." Daniel and Rebecca leaned forward, trying to see the document that had turned their parents into statues. "Let me explain what happened," I said, sitting back down, but maintaining eye contact with my parents. 6 months ago, Dad. You remember that phone call where you mentioned you were struggling with the mortgage payments since you took early retirement? Where you said the adjustable rate had increased and you were worried about keeping up? Father nodded slowly, still in shock. You told me not to worry about it, that you and Mom would figure something out. You said you didn't want to burden us kids with your financial problems. Well, I took action. I contacted your mortgage company, found out exactly how much you owed, and bought out your entire mortgage. You paid off our mortgage. Mother whispered. How could you possibly... I smiled, not with malice, but with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Mom, my cybersecurity company generated $2.8 million in revenue last year. I personally took home just over $800,000. Your remaining mortgage balance was $340,000. I paid it off in cash. The room was spinning with shock. Alina was smiling proudly beside me. Daniel's mouth was literally hanging open. Rebecca was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. My parents looked like they'd been hit by a truck. But why? My father finally managed to ask. Why would you do that without telling us? Because, I said, despite everything, despite years of being called the black sheep, despite having my career dismissed, despite being treated like the family failure, you're still my parents. I couldn't stand the thought of you losing. This house, the house where we grew up, where you've built your life. So I handled it quietly, the way I handle most problems. I pulled out another document from my phone, printing it as well. This is a life estate agreement I had my attorney draw up. It means you can live in this house for the rest of your lives, exactly as you always have. The house is in my name, but it's still your home. Nothing changes for you, except you don't have to worry about mortgage payments anymore. My mother was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. My father was staring at the deed like it was written in a foreign language. Daniel was the first to speak. Marcus, I had no idea your business was so successful. I mean, I knew it was doing well, but he trailed off, clearly recalculating everything he thought he knew about his little brother. Rebecca was shaking her head in amazement. All this time we thought, Mom and Dad always made it sound like you were struggling, like your career choice was risky. But you're more financially successful than any of us. She looked embarrassed, perhaps remembering all the times she'd felt superior about her stable career path. I never corrected your assumptions, I said, because I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to anyone. Built my business for me, for Alina, for our future. I didn't need your validation. But I also didn't realize how deeply you'd convinced yourselves that I was some kind of failure who needed constant guidance and couldn't be trusted with responsibility.
Oh.
My father was reading through the life estate agreement now, his hands shaking. Slightly, Marcus, he said quietly. I don't understand. If you could afford to do this, if your business is this successful, why didn't you tell us? Why let us worry about the mortgage? Because, I replied, every time I tried to share my successes with this family, they were dismissed or minimized. When I told you I was earning 6 figures from freelancing in college, you said it was play money. When I announced my first major corporate contract, you asked when I was going to get a real job. When I mentioned speaking at conferences, you changed the subject to Daniel's quarterly reports. Elena spoke up, for the first time during this exchange. Marcus has been featured on the cover of Cybersecurity magazine twice. He's been consulted by the Department of Homeland Security. His company is considered one of the most innovative cybersecurity firms in the Rocky Mountain region. But every time he tried to share these achievements with you, they were treated like they weren't important. My mother looked stricken. We didn't know, she whispered. We worried about you because your path was so different from what we understood. We thought we were being protective, said, my voice rising slightly. You were being dismissive. There's a difference between concern and condescension. Daniel cleared his throat. Marcus, I owe you an apology. We all do. I've been so focused on my own career that I never really paid attention to what you were building. I just ... I assumed Mom and Dad were right about your choices being risky. Rebecca nodded in agreement. I feel terrible. All those times I felt sorry for you for not having a stable career, and you were actually doing better than all of us. The money isn't the point, I said. I didn't pay off this mortgage to prove how successful I am. I did it because, despite everything, I love this family. I wanted to take care of you the way you took care of me growing up. But what hurts is that you've spent so many years convinced I was incapable of taking care of anything. My father was crying now too, something I'd seen maybe twice in my entire life. Son, he said, his voice breaking, I've been an idiot. We've been idiots. We were so caught up in our idea of what success looks like that we couldn't see the success right in front of us. You didn't just build a business, you built something extraordinary. And we missed it all because we were too stubborn to look past our own prejudices. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. Marcus, can you forgive us? Can you forgive your foolish parents who couldn't see past their own limited understanding of the world? I looked around the table at my family, really looked at them. They weren't the dismissive, judgmental people they'd seemed just an hour ago. They were human beings who'd made mistakes, who'd been operating from fear and limited perspective. Of course I forgive you, I said. But I need you to understand something. I didn't become successful despite being different. I became successful because I was different. Because I was willing to take risks, to build something new, to follow a path that didn't exist when you were making your career choices. The world has changed, and sometimes the black sheep is the one who sees where the flock needs to go. We spent the rest of Christmas Eve talking in a way we hadn't in years, really talking. I showed them articles about my company, explained what cybersecurity actually involves, shared stories about clients I'd helped protect from devastating attacks. They listened with genuine interest, asking real questions instead of polite, dismissive ones. Daniel admitted he'd always been intimidated by my technical knowledge, but had covered it up by dismissing it as unimportant. Rebecca confessed she'd felt competitive with me, but had convinced herself I wasn't really competition because my career path was weird. My parents acknowledged they'd been operating from outdated assumptions about what constituted a stable, respectable career. You know what the ironic thing is? I said as we sat in the living room later that evening. I've actually been trying to get your attention and approval for years. Every achievement, every milestone, every success, part of me was hoping it would finally be enough for you to see me as capable, as someone who'd made good choices. I just wanted to be valued for who I am, not criticized for who I'm not. My mother hugged me then, really hugged me, for the first time in years. You are valued, Marcus. You've always been valued. We just did a terrible job of showing it. We're so afraid of you getting hurt, of your choices not working out, that we couldn't celebrate when they did work out magnificently. Christmas Day was completely different from any holiday we'd had before. Instead of the usual pattern of Daniel and Rebecca being showcased while I was tolerated, we had actual conversations about our lives, our work, our dreams. My parents asked thoughtful questions about Elena's career, about our life in Denver, about my plans for expanding the business. Before Elena and I left to drive back to Colorado, my father pulled me aside. Marcus, he said, I want you to know that this house being in your name doesn't bother me. Actually, it makes me proud. Tells me we raised a son who's not only successful but generous, someone who takes care of family even when that family hasn't always taken care of him. That's the kind of man I hoped you'd become. As Elena and I drove north through the Arizona desert, I reflected on what had just happened. For years, I'd felt like the outsider in my own family, the one who didn't fit the mold, whose choices were constantly questioned. But it turned out that being the black sheep had given me something my siblings didn't have: the freedom to innovate, to take risks, to build something uniquely mine. Today, my relationship with my family is stronger than it's ever been. They've become genuinely interested in and supportive of my work. Daniel has even referred several clients to my company. Rebecca asks thoughtful questions about cybersecurity and healthcare. My parents visit us in Denver regularly, and they've stopped trying to fix or redirect my life. The house deed remains in my name, but that's not important anymore. What's important is that my family finally sees me for who I am, not the black sheep who needs constant guidance, but a successful entrepreneur who chose a different path and made it work. Sometimes being different isn't a problem to be solved. to strength to be celebrated. My story isn't unique. Every family has someone who doesn't fit the expected mold, whose choices seem risky or unconventional. But sometimes that person, the black sheep, the outsider, the one who takes the uncharted path, becomes the very person holding the family together. Not because they proved everyone wrong, but because they proved that there's more than one way to be successful, more than one way to be valuable, more than one way to take care of the people you love. If you're the black sheep in your family, if you're the one whose choices are constantly questioned, whose path seems too risky to everyone else, remember this: your difference might be your greatest strength. The world needs people who are willing to go where others won't, to build what others can't imagine, to solve problems in ways that haven't been tried before. And if you're the parent or sibling of someone whose path looks different from what you expected, try to see past your own definitions of success. The person you're worried about might be the very person who ends up taking care of you, protecting you, and showing you that the world is bigger and more full of possibility than you ever imagined. Family isn't about everyone following the same path. It's about supporting each other on whatever path we choose, celebrating different kinds of success, and recognizing that love sometimes means letting go of our expectations and embracing what actually is. Sometimes the black sheep isn't lost. They're just leading the flock to pastures the rest of the family couldn't see. I'm Marcus Thompson, still a cybersecurity consultant, still happily married to Alina, still the guy who prefers hoodies to polo shirts, am no longer the black sheep. I'm just Marcus, the son, who saw a problem and solved it, the brother who chose a different path and made it work, the family member who proves that success comes in many forms and love shows up in unexpected ways. That deed to the house, it's more than a legal document. It's proof that the person your family doesn't understand might be the very person who understands what family really means. It's evidence that taking care of people isn't about following their expectations, it's about meeting their needs, even when they can't see those needs themselves. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give your family isn't proving them right about their vision for your life. It's proving them wrong about their limitations on what your life could become. Sometimes being the black sheep means being the one who shows everyone else that the pasture is bigger than they ever dreamed. This Christmas, I'm not the black sheep anymore. I'm just Marcus, the son, the brother, the husband, the businessman, who happened to take an unconventional path to a conventional goal, taking care of the people he loves. And that, I've learned, is the only success that really matters. But the story doesn't end there. The months following that Christmas brought changes I never expected. My father, who had always been distant about anything technology-related, started calling me regularly to ask questions about cybersecurity. Not dismissive questions, but genuine curiosity about my work. He even asked if I could help secure his old company's systems during their transition to a new management structure. "Marcus," he said during one of our calls, "I've been thinking about what you said that night, about me not understanding your work. I want to learn. Could you explain to me what you actually do every day?" For the first time in my adult life, my father was asking me to teach him something. We spent 2 hours on that call, and by the end, he was asking thoughtful questions about data encryption and network security protocols. My mother surprised me even more. She started following my company's social media accounts and sharing articles about cybersecurity awareness with her real estate colleagues. She called me one day, excited about helping a client who was worried about online fraud. I told her my son owns a cybersecurity company, and she wants to know if you can help protect her business, she said proudly. It was the first time I'd heard that tone of pride when she talked about my work. Rebecca began incorporating cybersecurity discussions into her medical practice, asking me to speak to her colleagues about protecting patient data. She scheduled me for a presentation at the Arizona Medical Association's annual conference. "I want everyone to know that my brother is an expert in this field," she told me. "I should have been bragging about you years ago instead of worrying about your choices." Daniel's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. He not only referred clients to my company, but asked if I'd consider a partnership for cybersecurity consulting in the marketing space. "I've been researching what you do," he admitted. "And honestly, Marcus, you're operating at a level I didn't even know existed." I feel like an idiot for all those years I thought you were just playing with computers. The house became a symbol of something larger than ownership. During that spring, my parents decided to host Easter dinner there, something they'd stopped doing years earlier when they worried about expenses. "This feels like our home again," my mother said as she planned the menu. "Not because of the mortgage being gone, but because our family feels whole again." Alina and I drove down for Easter, and the atmosphere was completely different from any family gathering I could remember. My parents had printed out articles about my company and displayed them on the coffee table. It's like proud grandparents showing off school photos. They asked Alina detailed questions about her work, treated her opinions with respect, and included both of us in family decisions. But the most touching moment came when my father pulled out a photo album I'd never seen before. It was filled with pictures he'd secretly taken over the years, screenshots of articles mentioning my company, photos of me speaking at conferences that he'd found online, even a picture of me working on my laptop during a family visit years earlier. "I kept track of everything," he said quietly. "Every achievement, every article, every success. I just didn't know how to tell you I was proud because I was so afraid of admitting I'd been wrong about your path." The album spanned nearly a decade of my career milestones that I thought my family had ignored completely by summer. Our family dynamic had shifted so dramatically that people outside the family began to notice. At a neighborhood barbecue, I overheard my mother telling a neighbor, "Marcus runs one of the most successful cybersecurity firms in Colorado. He's been featured in national magazines and consulted by government agencies. We're so proud of him." The woman she was talking to looked impressed, and my mother beamed with genuine pride. The financial aspect of owning the house brought unexpected responsibilities: property taxes, maintenance issues, insurance decisions. Suddenly, my parents were consulting me on things they'd handled independently for decades. But instead of feeling burdened, I found these conversations brought us closer together. We were partners now in caring for the family home, not just parent and child. One evening in late summer, a father called with what he said was an important question. "Marcus, your mother and I have been talking. We know the house is in your name, but we want to make sure you know that, when we're gone, we hope you'll keep it in the family. Maybe for your children someday, or just as a place where the Thompson family can always gather." I realized then that the house had become more than just a financial transaction or a dramatic revelation. It had become a bridge between the family we used to be and the family we were becoming. "Dad," I told him, "that house will always be the Thompson family home. That's exactly what I intended when I bought it." Lena and I started making regular weekend trips to Phoenix, something we'd never done before. We'd work from my old bedroom, help with yard work, and spend evenings talking about everything from business strategies to family memories. These weren't obligatory visits anymore. They were genuine. Time together, the cybersecurity industry began to notice our family story too. A trade publication asked to interview me about work-life balance and family support in entrepreneurship. I found myself telling our story publicly for the first time, explaining how family misunderstanding had initially motivated me, but how family reconciliation had become even more powerful. "The most successful security system," I told the interviewer, "is one where every component understands and supports the others." Families work the same way. When family members truly understand each other's strengths and contributions, the whole family becomes more secure, more successful, more resilient. That interview was picked up by several business publications, and suddenly, I was being invited to speak not just about cybersecurity, but about family dynamics and entrepreneurial success. My parents attended one of these talks in Phoenix, sitting in the front row and applauding enthusiastically when I was introduced as one of the Southwest's most innovative cybersecurity entrepreneurs. As autumn approached, my mother called with an unexpected request. "Marcus, would you and Alina consider hosting Thanksgiving this year, here at the house? I think it would be meaningful for the family to gather in the home that you've preserved." For us, the symbolism wasn't lost on any of us. The black sheep was now being asked to host the family gathering in the house he owned, but they called home. Alina and I agreed, and that Thanksgiving became a celebration of everything our family had learned about acceptance, understanding, and love. Daniel brought his family. Rebecca came with her now husband. We cooked together, played games, and shared stories about our different career paths without any judgment or comparison. During dinner, Rebecca raised her glass for a toast. To Marcus, she said, who taught us that being different isn't something to fix or worry about, it's something to celebrate, and who showed us that taking care of family isn't about following expectations, it's about meeting needs we might not even know we have, Daniel added, and who proved that the person we thought needed the most guidance was actually the one doing the most guiding. My father, never one for emotional speeches, simply said, to the son who saved our home and brought our family back together, as we sat around that table, the same table where I'd endured years of well-meaning but misguided lectures, I realized that our story had become something bigger than just one family's journey. We'd learned that love doesn't mean understanding everything about each other immediately. Sometimes love means admitting you were wrong, being willing to learn, and celebrating success even when it doesn't look like what you expected. The house deed still sits in my safe in Denver, but it's become more than a legal document. It's a reminder that security, whether digital or familial, isn't about building walls or maintaining control. It's about creating systems where everyone is protected, valued, free to contribute their unique strengths. Alina often says that the best part of our story isn't the dramatic Christmas revelation, but the quiet Sunday mornings we now spend at the Phoenix House, just drinking coffee with my parents while they read articles about cybersecurity trends and ask thoughtful questions about our work. This, she says, is what family is supposed to feel like. My company continues to grow, but now I have something I never had before, a family that understands and supports what I do.
Oh.
When I travel for conferences, my mother sends encouraging texts. When I land a major contract, my father asks intelligent questions about the client's industry. When I face challenges in the business, my siblings offer insights from their own professional experiences. The black sheep label has disappeared completely. It's not because I changed who I am, but because my family expanded their definition of success, value, and contribution. I'm still the same person who prefers hoodies to polo shirts, who gets excited about elegant code, who sees problems as puzzles to solve. But now my family sees those traits as strengths rather than concerns. Sometimes, I think about that Christmas Eve dinner and how close we came to permanent estrangement. If I hadn't had the house deed in my back pocket, if I hadn't been financially successful enough to make that grand gesture, would we have found another way to bridge our differences? I believe we would have, because the real bridge wasn't the money or the property. It was the willingness to see each other clearly and love what we found. The most important lesson from our journey isn't about proving family wrong or achieving financial success despite their doubts. It's about persistence and love, patience with different perspectives, and faith that understanding can grow even when it seems impossible. The black sheep isn't always lost. Sometimes they're just taking a longer path home. And sometimes that longer path leads to a destination the whole family needed to reach today. When people ask me about the secret to cybersecurity, I tell them it's the same as the secret to family security: constant communication, mutual respect, and the understanding that protecting what you value most requires everyone to play their part. And sometimes, the person you least expect becomes the one holding the keys to everyone's safety and success. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.